Hello guys and welcome back to HJW Gaming. Following the previous leak that Azog the Defiler will be the next upcoming commander, check the video on my channel if you haven't seen it already, I've been thinking about who else is available to maybe be the next commander that we can see released. So I thought I'd have a quick run through of who is available from both the Lord of the Rings and the wider Middle-earth, kind of the Hobbit storylines as well, to be made into a commander. We do in fact have quite a few hints towards this, both in in-game assets and previous choices as well, and we can kind of talk through who else is available. If you like this kind of video, please drop a like and please consider hitting subscribe to see more of my content in the future, and yeah, we'll go straight into the video. First up, we're going to start with those commanders who already have in-game assets within the game. And the first of which should surprise almost nobody, as it is a commander that has been kind of teased and leaks for pretty much years now. We've always been promised that we would get the Balrog as a commander. However, he still remains with only the in-game asset and no actual commander information. We still haven't had him released. When Azog got leaked, everyone did think that the Balrog was the next one coming, but unfortunately it doesn't appear to be the case. The in-game model, of course, is present as a result of his use as one of the bosses on boss tiles when you use bait. So we don't have a full commander model for him yet. However, he is anticipated to be received. Whether he's still in production or whether that has been shelved, no one really knows. But I know there's definitely hype for him, so I think everyone would hope that he is going to be the next commander. So we'll see how. If you do think he should be the next commander, drop a comment below, and we'll see see if the devs see it and see if they also want to add the Balrog as the next commander. As he's likely to be evil side, I'd imagine, and evil side could definitely use some loving. I'd imagine, judging from his appearance in the films, he'd likely be a damage dealing commander, but of course that's just all theoretical for now. Of course, if the doors being opened for in-game bosses to become available as commanders, that will probably lead to additional demand for the other bosses to also be made into commanders. Of course, you do have the dragon asset as well, who could be and seems to represent Smaug from the Hobbit series, and you also have the giant spider, who appears to represent either Ungoliant or Shelob from the Lord of the Rings films. So if the Balrog is becoming available, that could open the door to both of these becoming new commanders in the future. And again, both have in-game assets as a result of being bosses. The next option is sticking with evil side and giving evil side some much needed loving, is of course to continue with adding the Nazgul 9. And this image is actually in the game database, showing what would appear to be another of the Nazgul 9, appearing to look a little bit similar to say the Undying. However, the most representative thing I can see is this enormous shield that he is wielding along with his mace. Now, this could actually, if you just play into with the enormous shield, play into what evil is missing more than anything at the minute, which is a kind of support-based commander that does offer great defensive support, akin to, say, White Council offered by Gandalf the White and Gandalf the Grey, or Thrain's Guards offered by Falgin. So if this commander was brought into the game, this could really help to boost evil side if it was brought in that kind of capacity. So I think this would be a great option for the next evil commander if the Balrog is not going to follow the hype and not going to be the next one brought in. And last up for characters with in-game assets already, we do have a character who, it's surprising, hasn't already been given a commander already, as he forms such an enormous part of the Lord of the Rings films. I am, of course, referring to Gollum. Now, Gollum does have an asset in the game, as he is often used for various different events, as well as, I believe, some of the Red Book or the new Red Book exercises as well. So he does already have an asset in the game. However, I see no reason why he couldn't be added as an evil side commander, as he is kind of more pinnacle to the films and the lore than many of the other commanders we have in the game already. So I think Gollum should equally be considered to become one of the future commanders. Now, moving over to good side momentarily, we will take a look at the current trends of commanders coming out in Rise to War, and it appears to be following the Hobbit franchise and picking out characters from there. Of course, we've had Bard recently, and with Azog leaked as well, it looks like we're continuing that trend. We've had Thorin as well. So potentially the game is going to consider looking towards bringing in more Hobbit-based characters. So who else is available within the Hobbit that could come into the game? The first thing that would spring to mind, of course, is to bring the remainder of the dwarves from the Hobbit franchise. We, of course, already have Thorin, Balin, Dwalin, for example. So you could also bring in others such as Glowin or Owen. However, I think the most likely of these dwarves who would come in is maybe a pairing similar to that you have of the Hobbits with Merry and Pippin, is potentially a pairing of Kili and Fili, as these two play a slightly more significant part in the Hobbit films, at least, compared to a lot of the other dwarfs within the Hobbit Fellowship. So I would think that Kili and Fili should be reasonably high up on at least the good side list to come up from The Hobbit. And as they're twins, I think it likely that they probably come as a pairing similar to Frodo Sam and Merry Pippin. Whether they'd be good or not in theory, of course you can never tell to when they come into the game. However, they don't appear to be massively combat strong within the film, so they'd likely be more support commanders along the kind of gist of hopefully Falgin rather than Ori, for example. But yeah, I think they're definitely well placed to be brought into the game in future. Another option for good side commander could be to bring in what is potentially one of the strongest commanders we would see, at least if the game chose to follow the lore. But we've seen in some cases they haven't, with commanders like Galadriel, who should be, way in excess of everyone else, and Sauron as well. Obviously having to fit within a in-game meta. If this commander was to come in, it would absolutely have to be one of the tier 3s and one of the top tier commanders. I am, of course, talking about the ever-elusive Tom Bombadil. Someone who, within the books at least, I found particularly irritating, actually. But he does, of course, hold a place of favour in a lot of people's hearts, as they would have read The Hobbit years and years and years ago. And also, he is a particularly elusive character with a lot of very, very interesting lore. I believe he's also coming in the upcoming Rings of Power series as well, so we may learn a little bit more about him if that is to be taken as canon. But yeah, Tom Bombadil, who's brought in, is a particular deity that kind of is said to exist before the universe. So he would be particularly powerful and have to be a tier 3 commander, likely a tier 3 support commander, unfortunately, as he doesn't appear to me to be a particular damage dealer, and he's more known to wander about the forest. So I think it's more likely that he would be a support character. But if they're bringing in Hobbit characters again, I do think Tom Bombadil would be a great option to bring in, and one that would bring a lot of hype along with him for people to be excited to give him a try. And lastly, for the good side at least of the Hobbit franchise, the other option, of course, to bring in 2 other dwarves, and those which don't really form a major part of the film, but of course are mentioned in the lore of the film. And I'm, of course, talking about Thrain and Thror, who are the father and grandfather of Thorin Oakenshield and the owners of the Arkenstone, as well as the Dwarven Ring of Power. So they would be potentially good options if you wanted to bring particularly strong dwarves in, though I find this somewhat unlikely, as we do have an excess of dwarves at the minute, as well as a lot of kind of more major character dwarfs being available. So I think it's unlikely you'd get either of these, but they could be a very interesting option if the devs decide to bring them in. And of course, they're not kind of restricted as much by copyrights, etc. with both of these, as they have a little bit of license to experiment with how they look, as of course neither of them formed a kind of major part of the film. So these could be another good option to bring into the game. But into the evil side of The Hobbit and kind of theory crafting who could be brought into the game, there's one in particular that strikes my fancy and I think would be particularly entertaining to see come into the game, and that is, of course, the Great Goblin. I know I've heard from a lot of people they are dying to see the Great Goblin come into the game. I've had comments on videos and Reddit, etc. as well, and Discord, wondering when the Great Goblin's going to come in, as he is a particularly entertaining character in the game, and I think he'd actually have quite an entertaining place within the kind of meta space of the game, as he could give some much needed loving to kind of the orcish race and help out with the goblins. So yeah, by giving some much needed boosts to Orcish race, he could help that evil side immensely, particularly if, as he looks, he is a tanky kind of commander. If he does add that kind of tankiness skill, similar to what I said about one of the Nazgul commanders earlier on, he would definitely improve, particularly in roleplay, the evil side, and he could just add a more diverse option away that takes us away from the very kind of stale meta of Sauron and Gandalf the White. So I think it would be awesome to see the Great Goblin come into the game. However, I do find it more likely that following the introduction of Azog, we actually see the Great Goblin's successor coming at some point in the future. And that is, of course, Bolg, who's the commander who takes over the Dwarven Legion and is their commander during the Battle of the Five Armies. So I think it's more likely that we see Bolg than the Great Goblin, which of course would be a great shame, but he could, of course, could bring in similar skills to those that I discussed on the Great Goblin side and really improve that evil meta. The reason I say he's kind of more likely is he's a slightly more major character, I think, appearing in more of the films and a couple more scenes than the Great Goblin. He also would follow on from Azog quite well, of course, being Azog's second in command. And if Azog is, as we expect, coming in as a tier 3 commander, then it would make sense for Bolg to be introduced as a tier 2. So I think that fits quite nicely because obviously they can't just only release tier 3 commanders all the time. We do need a little bit of variance to switch things up. So I think Bolg would fit quite nicely within that space and would make a lot of sense if he was one of the next commanders brought out. And lastly, just one chucked in there for fun, not one that I think would be brought into the game, but one that I think would be particularly entertaining, is just two other kind of fairly minor characters that do of course appear in 2 of the films, that I think would be an entertaining pair to bring into the game, and of course could be brought in as another commander pair. That would be the Master and Alfred Lickspittle. Alfred, of course, takes up the role almost of like the kind of Grima of The Hobbit, but slightly more child-friendly, I'd suggest. And Stephen Fry playing in the films, the Master does a quite funny job. Of course, these are 2 residents of Lake Town who kind of pillage and plunder wealth of all their citizens for their own personal gain, and eventually they do see their comeuppance within the film. We have seen Bard previously, so I think it'd be quite fun to see these 2 come in as, again, maybe tier 2 commanders on the evil side. I think they'd be quite funny to see. I doubt they'd have skills that would make them particularly meta, but I do think it would still be quite entertaining to see them come in, potentially with something like crowd control skills would make lore sense, at least against the film, and I think it would be really entertaining to see them brought into the game. And with that kind of brings to a head the kind of discussion I wanted to have on who could become one of the future commanders. Of course, I don't have any inside information here. I'm just kind of having a discussion and theory crafting who I think would fit well within the game. If you have any thoughts on who you'd like to see brought into the game, please drop a like and please drop your message down in the comments to let me know, and I'm sure I can pass that information on, and you may see more new commanders coming up in the future. Anyway, I've been HJW Gaming, and I really hope to see you in the next one.